What's up everyone, I'm the one and only Zage, and today we'll be talking about Luffy versus Kaido and why by the end of the fight, Luffy surpassed Kaido in strength. Now this has become a more nuanced and contentious subject considering the circumstances of Kaido's defeat. However, I do think that most of the points that are brought up in favor of Kaido still being stronger by the end are a little bit exaggerated, and that the narrative in general has a strong basis for Luffy actually being the stronger of the two by the end. So we'll delve into it further in a second. But before we do that, if you're new to the channel or you like content like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That'd be much appreciated as it would help me out with the YouTube algorithm. The main reason why many feel like Kaido is still stronger than Luffy by the end of the fight is due to the amount of assistance Luffy had in wearing down Kaido. Kaido had fought many people in this Onigashima raid. However, the amount of damage that came outside of Luffy in general is often overvalued and exaggerated. So Kaido first fights the Scabbards, and although he was surprised and was shocked that they were even able to damage him, he was not impressed by the power of their attacks. He says that their sword, their blade, bear no resemblance to Odin's, and with their strongest joint attack from 4 of the Scabbards, their final Paradise Totsuka, he says that it was still too shallow and they couldn't even open the old scar. That was the expectation that Kaido had for them due to seeing Odin's visage in their spirit. Although these attacks were working on Kaido, they genuinely meant nothing and they were barely doing anything to actually wear down Kaido. They were too shallow, they were very weak, they were basically barely affecting him at all. And this is actually put into perspective when you compare the Scabbard's attacks to the Supernova. The problem is that a lot of people are caught by the quantity of Kaido's opponents and not actually thinking about the quality of the damage that is being dealt to him. The Scabbards basically did next to nothing, and it was negligible and barely relevant in Kaido's ultimate defeat. To some extent, the same can be said about the top 5 Supernova as well. Just like the Scabbards, they were able to damage Kaido too, but to a much greater extent, to the point where Kaido was not impressed by the attacks of the Scabbards, but against the Supernova, he was complimenting their efforts. It's even stated in the Vivica databook about Kaido that the appearance of strong enemies, that being the Supernova, in front of him since Kozuki Oden made his heart of a battle enthusiast pound in his chest. However, despite the Supernova doing much better than the Scabbards did, just like the Scabbards, their attacks were also too shallow. This is based on the fact that Luffy, by his own admission after using all he could in Gear 4, using his Ryo that can internally damage Kaido, he said that his attacks were still too shallow. So as for the other Supernova, their attacks at best, that being Kid, Law and Killer, are relative to Luffy and realistically probably weaker at the time. The only attack that actually did something to Kaido that wasn't shallow was Zoro's Ashura, as that left a scar. But outside of that, everyone's attacks on Kaido were shallow. And to put it into perspective how weak those attacks were, Luffy, after awakening Conqueror's Haki and fusing it into his attacks, which at this point his mastery of it was crude and clumsy, his no-named base attacks were more powerful than his Gear 4 Gatling. So they would be stronger than Law's Gamma Knife, Kid's Punk Gibson, Killer's Sonic Scyther, and Zoro's Tatsumaki. All of those attacks. So the fact that Luffy's basic, crude and clumsy Conqueror's attacks were dealing more damage to Kaido than the previous Supernova attacks just goes to show you that in the grand scheme of things, the Supernova's attacks, the damage that they were dealing to Kaido in the grand scheme of things was negligible. They weren't really doing all that much to wear down Kaido, and that's including the Scabbard as well. All their attacks weren't really doing all that much because in context we know that the only way to do real lasting damage to Kaido is with Conqueror's Haki, and even then it took a lot of attacks for Luffy to ultimately take Kaido down and power-ups along the way. So Luffy then goes on to fight a one-on-one against Kaido, in which he ultimately loses due to his use of Conqueror's Haki at this point still being crude and clumsy. However, we do see Kaido actually show some real signs of fatigue that we actually haven't seen up until this point, where he's huffing and puffing a lot more than he ever has. Although compared to, and in the grand scheme of things, Kaido's not actually all that worn out, and the island is still stable at this point. But while Luffy is down at this time, in comes Yamato. Unlike the Supernova and the Scabbards, Yamato is actually the one person that's actually providing real help to Luffy in wearing down Kaido, because she can use Conqueror's coating as well. This is shown by the end of the fight, as due to the damage that Yamato has been dealing on Kaido, on top of the fight that Kaido just had with Luffy, the stability of the island has gotten weaker. And we know that the stability of the island is correlated to Kaido's health. As Kaido gets weaker, the stability of the island also gets weaker too. So due to Yamato also having advanced Conqueror's Haki, she actually did the most help to actually wear down Kaido, and unironically did more to help Luffy than the Scabbards and Supernova did, as crazy as that may sound. After this, Luffy returns to the battle after being rejuvenated after eating some meat and, bringing back his stamina. He returns to the fight, splits the sky with Kaido, and that shows that his usage of Conqueror's Haki from this point forward has now become mastered. Luffy does the best that he can to try to defeat Kaido, using all his gears, and even pushes Kaido to use his future sight in order to combat the speed of Snake Man. However, all this still resulted in Luffy's defeat yet again with interference from CP0. Now, whether or not you think CP0's interference really changes the outcome of this battle doesn't really matter. The point I'm trying to drive home here is that the result of Luffy's defeat was so bad that this guy, depending on your interpretation, was either on the brink of death or outright just died. This point right here is very significant, and people don't stress this enough, because some people act like the damage that Luffy took to get to that point where he's on the brink of death miraculously disappeared the moment he awakened Gear 5. Now obviously Luffy's awakening gave him back some energy, as moments before he couldn't fight and was on the brink of death, and now he's able to carry on fighting Kaido. That's kind of obvious, and you could just blatantly see it on panel. However, people make it out like Luffy came out of the Lazarus pit and the guy is completely healthy. He took a senzu bean, and all the damage that he took that brought him to the brink of death was ultimately and just completely wiped out. So Luffy is not at some advantage in health when he's fighting Kaido in the final round. You can say this for when Luffy picked up the fight after Yamato left, as Kaido was definitely weaker due to the island being unstable, and Luffy just came back rejuvenated. But the reason why it's like that is because at that point, regardless of Kaido's health, he is still much stronger than Luffy is. I mean, Luffy's attacks are less effective on Kaido than Kaido's attacks are on Luffy. Otherwise, if that wasn't true, Luffy would have won and there would have been no need for Gear 5. This is why he had help from the Supernova in the early rounds, right? And needed to be helped while the guy was knocked out. Otherwise, he would have died in that moment, right? Because he's much weaker than him. Just because Kaido defeated Luffy 3 or 4 times in the past does not mean that Kaido is stronger than peak Gear 5 Luffy. That's not how it works. Just because Kaido beat, former versions of Luffy that are much weaker than he is in his prime, does not mean that Kaido is stronger than Luffy at the end. And as we've clearly demonstrated, by the time that Gear 5 fought Kaido, right, there was no advantage on health on either side, and if anything, you can argue that Luffy was more damaged than Kaido was, and the rest is history. Now, what I just went over for almost 10 minutes is the main argument and reasoning behind why some people think that Kaido is still stronger than Luffy by the end of the fight, and it's the help that Luffy had along the way. Now, when you put it into perspective and, you put certain things into context and you add context that are missing and within this reasoning, it's definitely an argument that, although understandable at face value, does not really work, when you actually look at the intricacies of the fight. And also, it is completely against the narrative, and the narrative that I'm referring to is the Joy Boy narrative. So when Luffy lost against Kaido in his 1v1 after first awakening Advanced Conqueror's Haki, Kaido says that I guess you couldn't be Joy Boy either. Now what he meant by this is due to his personal belief after finding out about Joy Boy from Oden's journal. He believed that there was no one else in the world capable of defeating him, that he was the strongest, and the only person that could defeat him was Joy Boy. And Joy Boy came, that being Luffy, when he awakened Gear 5 and defeated Kaido. It's not meant to be that complicated. Joy Boy is basically the Kaido defeater. It's the one with Kaido defeating power. That is basically the entire narrative. And even in the Gear 5 fight itself, Luffy says when Kaido asks him who he is, because he just can't tell as if this is the same person, the same Luffy that he's been fighting all this time, Luffy has to remind him that, who he is, and he says that he's going to surpass him in this fight, that he's the man that will surpass him and become Pirate King. So there's two narratives there. There's the Joy Boy narrative, and there's also just the regular Luffy surpassing his opponents narrative, right? That Luffy says and ultimately achieves, like he does against Crocodile, like he does against Rob Lucci and some other fights during the series. And although I understand all the caveats people place on Luffy's win to say that Kaido is still stronger than Luffy, I mean, hypothetically, if you were just to ask Kaido, the man himself, if he's alive that is, right, who is stronger out of Luffy and Kaido, like yourself, right, and Luffy, who is stronger, just narratively, based on the narrative, Kaido would say that Luffy is stronger than him. And even when Kaido was getting defeated, he had a flashback to his conversation with King about Joy Boy and him being the only person that can defeat Kaido, right? And he's not thinking, nah, maybe Luffy can't be Joy Boy because of these caveats during the fight and the help that he had. No, Kaido lost, Luffy is stronger. And actually there's another narrative in the fight that supports this, and that being the Haki narrative. The speech that Kaido had about Haki transcending all. Kaido says to Luffy that a strong devil fruit ability alone isn't enough to conquer the seas. Roger didn't have a devil fruit and he was able to do it. With context, Kaido doesn't really know anything, but Kaido is basically saying to ultimately do what Roger did, right, and be that great, right? Haki is the power that allows you to get there. The pinnacle of Haki is what allows you to reach the heights that Roger reached, not a strong devil fruit ability. And in this context, Haki can mean two things. Sometimes Oda will mention Haki just as a blanket statement in certain instances without actually specifically mentioning what type of Haki it is, and we can decipher from context what it's referring to. For example, when Shanks walks onto Whitebeard's ship, the Whitebeard pirates say that Shanks' Haki is amazing as always. What they're referring to is his Conqueror's Haki, as he's using Conqueror's Haki to knock down the Whitebeard pirates. When Law is saying that he can't move Kaido and Big Mom with his devil fruit ability because Kaido and Big Mom's Haki is too strong, we know in context he's referring to Armament Haki, as Rayleigh explains that Armament Haki is the sole countermeasure to devil fruits. So you kind of get what I'm saying. Kaido is doing something similar here, where he's saying Haki as a blanket statement, but what exactly is he referring to? The first interpretation that makes sense would be that Kaido is referring to Conqueror's Haki, specifically infusing oneself with Conqueror's Haki, as this, as he said to Luffy earlier on in the fight, is only capable by a handful of the very strongest. Rayleigh also explained that Conqueror's Haki, unlike Armament Haki and Observation Haki, can't be trained, and the only way it gets stronger is for the Conqueror himself or herself to get stronger. So essentially, in a battle between two conquerors, the one who has the stronger Conqueror's Haki is the stronger of the two. And ultimately, in their final clash, the Badran Gun versus Kaido's final attack, Luffy prevailed, proving that his Haki was stronger than Kaido's, proving that he is the stronger conqueror. And if you're the stronger conqueror, you're just outright overall stronger in strength. Now, the second interpretation of Haki here, which I also have, and it basically links with the first one, is Haki as a measure of overall power, basically your power level. And this has been done in the story, as Haki in general, just the blanket power itself, is a power that resides in everybody. The stronger someone is, the more powerful their Haki, and this has been shown and been used in such a way in the story itself. For example, Blackbeard in Mocktown, when he saw Luffy's new bounty of 100 million, he says that judging off his bounty, he thought that 30 million was definitely too low, meaning essentially that Luffy's power level, his strength, right, he was too strong for a 30 million berry bounty. So in this context, Haki was essentially a replacement and meant Luffy's power level. Blackbeard does this again when he meets Luffy in Impel Down and sees Gear 2nd, and he gets attacked by Gear 2nd. He says that Luffy's Haki has gotten stronger. In other words, his power level has grown. So the thing is, the reason why I said it connects with the first interpretation is that as a conqueror, your conqueror's haki only grows as the user grows stronger, right? So as their power level gets stronger, their conqueror's haki is getting better. That's why I said it links with the first interpretation, and I would say that the first interpretation probably does make more sense given the context of Kaido mentioning, you know, a handful of the very strongest being able to infuse themselves with conqueror's haki, and ultimately speaking, it actually did come down to a haki clash. As the chapter in which Kaido was defeated, there was an editor's note that said, a fierce haki clash, who will prevail? And that was the point. The point is that the stronger of the two would win due to the battle of their hakis going head to head, and due to the fact that Luffy won, proved that he is stronger, on top of the fact that he is Joy Boy, which is supported by the narrative, and the whole damage argument and the help that Luffy got, making it so that Kaido is still stronger than Luffy by the end. That argument and line of reasoning doesn't work and is actually outright contradicted by the narrative of Joy Boy and haki transcending all. Anyways, that's all my thoughts on this subject. At the very least, I hope I gave you a new perspective that you may not have already had on the Luffy versus Kaido fight. If you've changed your mind and you once thought Kaido was stronger and now you think Luffy is stronger, let me know in the comment section below and tell me what changed your mind. If you still think that Kaido is stronger than Luffy, let me know in the comment section why you still think that, and you know, let me know why I'm bugging. I'm pretty sure I am not. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. I appreciate everyone that stays to the end. And as always, I've been the one and only Sage. And until next time.